The 1st of September, 1939. Nazi Germany invades Poland, triggering World War II. The last operational Polish unit surrenders on the 6th of October, and after Poland's defeat, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union divide the country in accordance with a secret protocol to the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. This agreement, which will become known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, was signed in Moscow 1 week before the start of the war, on the 23rd of August by German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop and Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov. 2 years later, in May 1941, a Soviet agent in Japan reports to Moscow that Berlin informed the German embassy in Tokyo that the German attack on its ally, the Soviet Union, will commence in the latter part of June. This agent's name is Richard Sorge. Richard Sorge was born on the 4th of October, 1895, in Baku, then part of the Russian Empire. He was the youngest of 9 children of Gustav Wilhelm Richard Sorge, a German mining engineer, and his Russian wife, Nina Semyonovna Kobyeleva. His father, who had nationalist and imperialist political views, moved back to Germany with his family in 1898 after his lucrative contract expired. The First World War began on the 28th of July, 1914. Sorge enlisted in the German army in October of the same year and was posted to a field artillery battalion with the 3rd Guards Division. He served on the Western Front and was seriously wounded there in March 1916 when shrapnel severed 3 of his fingers and broke both of his legs, causing a lifelong limp. He was promoted to the rank of corporal, received the Iron Cross, and was later medically discharged. While fighting in the war, Sorge, who had started out in 1914 as a right-wing nationalist, became disillusioned by what he called the meaninglessness of war and moved to the left. During his convalescence, Richard read books of German socialist revolutionaries, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, and became a communist. He spent the remainder of the war studying economics at various universities and witnessed the sailors' mutiny, which helped spark the German Revolution. He then joined the Independent Social Democratic Party and in 1919 received his doctorate in political science. By this time, he had joined the Communist Party of Germany, but his political views got him fired from both a teaching job and coal mining work. However, Sorge was recruited as an agent for Soviet intelligence, and in 1924, he and his wife Christiana Gerlach, the ex-wife of a wealthy communist and professor of political science in Kiev, whom Sorge married in 1921, moved to Moscow. In 1929, already divorced Sorge was invited to join the Soviet military intelligence Red Army's 4th Department, and the same year, instructed to remain undercover and to stay out of politics, he went to the United Kingdom to study the English Labour movement, the status of the Communist Party of Great Britain, and the country's political and economic conditions. In November 1929, Sorge was sent to Germany with instruction to join the Nazi Party and not to associate with any left-wing activists. As cover, he got a job with the agricultural newspaper. In 1930, Sorge was sent to Shanghai, China. Undercover as the editor of a German news service, Sorge established himself as an expert on Chinese agriculture, and in that role he traveled around the country and contacted members of the Chinese Communist Party. In January 1932, Sorge reported on fighting between Chinese and Japanese troops in the streets of Shanghai. The mission was successful, as he and his agents escaped detention and expanded the Soviet intelligence network. In 1933, Sorge returned to Moscow, where he wrote a book about Chinese agriculture and married Ekaterina Maximova, a woman he had met in China and brought back with him to Russia. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party came into power in Germany in January 1933. In May the same year, the Military Intelligence Department decided to have Sorge organize an intelligence network in Japan. He was given the codename Ramsey, and first went to Berlin to renew contacts in Germany and to obtain a new newspaper assignment as a German journalist in Japan as cover. The reason for this was that in September 1931, the Japanese army had seized the Manchuria region of China, which gave Japan another land border in Asia with the Soviet Union. At the time, several Japanese army generals advocated following up the seizure of Manchuria by invading the Soviet Far East. Until the mid-1930s, it was Japan, rather than Germany, that was considered to be the main threat by Moscow. In Berlin, Sorge insinuated himself into the Nazi Party and read Nazi propaganda, particularly Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf. Sorge attended so many beer halls with his new acquaintances that he gave up drinking to avoid saying anything inappropriate. Sorge was so successful at establishing his cover as an intensely Nazi journalist that when he departed Germany, Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels attended his farewell dinner. Sorge arrived in Yokohama on the 6th of September 1933. After landing in Japan, he became the Japan correspondent for the Frankfurter Zeitung, the most prestigious newspaper in Germany. Sorge's new status and reputation as a Nazi journalist who detested the Soviet Union served as an excellent cover for his espionage work. His task in Japan was more challenging than it had been in China. The Soviets had very little intelligence capacity in Japan, so Sorge would have to build a network of agents from nothing. His mission in Japan was to give very careful study to the question of whether or not Japan was planning to attack the Soviet Union. Between 1933 and 1934, Sorge formed a network of agents who had contacts with senior politicians and obtained information on Japanese foreign policy. Soon, even German diplomats, including the Ambassador Herbert von Dirksen, came to depend upon Sorge as a source of intelligence on the fractious and secretive world of Japanese politics. In 1935, Sorge passed on to Moscow a planning document which strongly suggested that Japan was not planning an attack on the Soviet Union in 1936, and he guessed correctly that Japan would invade China in July 1937, and that there was no danger of a Japanese invasion of Siberia. At this time, Sorge lived in a house in a respectable neighborhood in Tokyo, where he was noted mostly for heavy drinking and the reckless way in which he rode his motorcycle. In 1938, the German ambassador to Britain, Joachim von Ribbentrop, was promoted to foreign minister, and to replace Ribbentrop, German ambassador in Japan, the previously mentioned Herbert von Dirksen, was sent to London. Ribbentrop promoted Eugen Ott, whose wife was sleeping with Sorge, to be Dirksen's replacement. After Ott became the ambassador to Japan in April 1938, Sorge had breakfast with him daily, and they discussed German-Japanese relations in detail. Ott was aware that Sorge was sleeping with his wife, but tolerated their affair on the grounds that Sorge was such a charismatic man that women always fell in love with him, and so it was only natural that Sorge would sleep with his wife. Ott liked to call Sorge Richard the Irresistible, as his charm made him attractive to women. Ott greatly valued Sorge as a source of information about the secretive world of Japanese politics, especially Japan's war with China, since Ott found that Sorge knew so many things about Japan that no other Westerner knew that he chose to overlook Sorge's affair with his wife. Ott trusted Sorge so much that sometimes he drafted the cables that Ott sent under his name to Berlin, and he was allowed to access top-secret cables sent from Germany to the embassy. Ott even sent Sorge out as a German courier to carry secret messages to the German consulates in Canton, Hong Kong, and Manila. In 1938, Sorge again reported to Moscow that there were no plans in Tokyo for a general war against the Soviet Union. The Second World War began on the 1st of September 1939. Even though the Soviet Union was a German ally, Sorge supplied Soviet intelligence with information about the anti-communist pact between Germany and Japan. In 1941, his embassy contacts made him learn of Operation Barbarossa, a code name for the imminent Axis invasion of the Soviet Union, and the approximate date. On the 30th of May, 1941, Sorge reported to Moscow, "Berlin informed Ott that the German attack will commence in the latter part of June. Ott 95% certain war will commence." On the 20th of June, 1941, 2 days before the invasion, Sorge reported, "Ott told me that war between Germany and the Soviet Union is inevitable." Even though Moscow received the reports, Stalin and other top Soviet leaders ultimately ignored Sorge's warnings, as well as those of other sources, including early false alarms. Other Soviet agents, who also reported an imminent German invasion, were also regarded with suspicion by Stalin. Less than 2 years after the German-Soviet pact was signed, German forces, with 134 divisions at full fighting strength and 73 more divisions for deployment behind the front, invaded the Soviet Union on the 22nd of June, 1941. The German soldiers were supported by 650,000 troops from Germany's allies. The Soviets wanted to know if Japan was going to attack them as well. On the 14th of September, 1941, Sorge reported to Moscow, "In the careful judgment of all of us here, the possibility of Japan launching an attack, which existed until recently, has disappeared." Sorge advised the Red Army on the 14th of September, 1941, that Japan would not attack the Soviet Union until Moscow had been captured. The Japanese army had become 3 times the size of the Soviet Far Eastern forces, and a civil war had started in Siberia. This information made possible the transfer of Soviet divisions from the Far East, although the presence of the Japanese army in Manchuria necessitated the Soviet Union's keeping of a large number of troops on the eastern borders. As the war progressed, Sorge's increasing number of radio messages made the Japanese begin to suspect that an intelligence ring was operating. He was also coming under increasing suspicion from Berlin, but the Germans concluded that the allegations that Sorge was a Soviet agent were groundless, and Sorge's loyalty was to Germany. However, the Kempeitai, the Japanese secret police, intercepted many messages and began to close in on the German Soviet agent, whom they finally arrested in Tokyo on the 18th of October, 1941. Initially, the Japanese believed, because of his Nazi Party membership and German ties, that Sorge had been a German agent. However, the Abwehr, the German military intelligence service, denied that Richard Sorge had been one of their agents. Under brutal torture, Sorge confessed, but the Soviet Union denied he was a Soviet agent. The Japanese made 3 overtures to the Soviet Union and offered to trade Sorge for one of their own spies. However, the Soviet Union declined all of the Japanese attempts and maintained that Sorge was unknown to them. Sorge told his Kempeitai captors that "I was successfully approached by the German embassy in Japan and won the absolute trust by people there. Was the foundation of my organization in Japan, even in Moscow. The fact that I infiltrated into the center of the embassy and made use of it for my spying activity is evaluated as extremely amazing, having no equivalent in history." Richard Sorge was 49 years old when he was hanged on the 7th of November, 1944, at 10:20 a.m. Tokyo time in Sugamo prison. To make him suffer as much as possible, the Japanese had hanged Sorge in such a way that his horrible convulsing lasted 19 long minutes before he died. Because of wartime fuel shortages, his body was not cremated and he was buried in a mass grave. The Soviet Union did not officially acknowledge Sorge, who was considered the greatest spy of all time, until 1964, when he was posthumously awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union.
Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.